All right, so I am going to talk about my website, which is based on a JavaScript game that I wrote a little over a year ago, and I've kind of been improving bit by bit here and there. And with PHP being more of a server-side language, I decided, wow, this would be a great opportunity to kind of develop the back end for this game, because so far I've pretty much only been developing the front end. Um, as you can see, there's all these different boards that I made, and part of the cool thing of this is you can make your own boards too. But just to demonstrate, I'm gonna show you guys the Bombalooza board here. This one's kind of fun. You get to see a bunch of explosions. First thing you do is you gotta aim these balls to bounce around. And oh, that's not good. It's coming back down, but in a second here it'll all change. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Kaboom. Now most of the boards aren't like this, of course. I can go in here and play my slingshot, which kind of like makes the balls like slingshot around in a circle with all these directional blocks that kind of redirect the balls. So I guess you get the idea what this game is kind of all about. And then here's the board editor, and this lets you pick up blocks, drag them around. You can add blocks. There's those bomb blocks. Here's the directional ones. These are kind of like transparent directional ones. Balls go through them. These are solid directional ones where the balls bounce off them, but it kind of changes the angle of their bounce. So a lot of things that can go on in this game. And with that overview, we are going to go into the code for it, starting with the JavaScript here. So these are all the JavaScript scripts that I wrote that helped to make this thing possible. As you can see, there's quite a lot. I think the last time I counted it was somewhere on the order of 15,000 lines of code. A lot of geometry and like angles, algebra, physics kind of stuff. There's also serializing. I have a whole system of serializing the blocks and the boards and using JSON. A little more complicated than just vanilla JSON though. So that's the front end, of course, and that's all JavaScript. But now we're going to talk about the back end. And I guess the back end would start with the database. And I wrote a whole series of PHP classes and kind of utilities that are based on database objects. And it all starts with the database table, which is an object that represents a table, of course, the DBT I call it. And every DBT has a DBR, or database record class, that starts with an abstract class and then goes on to become the individual table class. So like, for example, there's a board class, and the cool thing about this is that the DBR and the DBT are able to dynamically change the fields if the table changes. Every single time the program runs, they query the database itself for the structure of the tables, and they kind of base their own structure on what the database tells them, including foreign key relationships, one-to-many relationships, all that. Like here's the foreign key reference object that represents that. So that kind of helps to streamline that, especially like as far as typecasting and field validation. A lot of that has become extremely streamlined with this, to the point where like something like my homepage for this thing, take a look at this. That's it. That's all the code that it takes to do the homepage, because all of this is nested in this header class, in the user token. That's the authentication system. The board node JSON. This is just a way of loading the boards without the overhead of a large JSON file into the PHP, and then the JSON is loaded separately by the client in a separate system. And so that gets into the next part, which is the interface between the client and the server, and that's where this thing called XML Http Requests comes in. I just started learning about this. I mean, I've heard of them before, but I just started doing it because of the PHP class. And the way this ends up working is the XHR, the JavaScript client, is sending periodic posts to the server without actually changing its web page. It's doing it all from the same web page. As, for example, as that editor, as you edit the boards, the browser is sending the changes in real time to the server, and the server is updating its database in real time. And there's kind of a conversation. So I've taken the so-called stateless web into a stateful form here with that. Beyond that, there's a whole system of monitoring, kind of like the framework for a cybersecurity system, and that is based in the user module here. This one is especially interesting. I've been developing this one for the last 3 projects. I think it's been evolving. But the basic idea is that you've got users. It's all stored. Their passwords are stored with a password hash. But beyond that, they get, when they sign in addition to the PHP session, they also get what's called an authentication token, which is a long kind of random string created. It's a hash also. It's created from some random characters. And they hold on to that cookie in their browser, and that is their ticket to say yes, this is who I actually am. And on top of that, every single request that is made of the server is logged in the database. It's tracked to the user, the PHP session. Every time those XHR requests come in, they are logged. And as you can see here, this is the entire log of every request that's been made since I started this particular project, all the way up to 2000. So I've really been experimenting with this. It records the URI, it records the session ID, that's a foreign key for the session table. It records the session token, that's the authentication token that's stored in the session, and as well as on the user side, and the cookie. And if they're not logged in, instead it just records their user agent, and otherwise these are recorded in the tokens, as well as their IP address, whether it's IPv4 or IPv6, the port number, the method, and the number of database connections it took to fulfill that request. So it's all pretty involved here, as you can see. And as you can also see in my user agent table, I've got information about each one. This is actually my iPhone that I connected to the to my local network. Since I'm running this locally on my own VM, I'm able to serve this web page up through my router. And I've actually got a number of user agents in here because I've opened this web page in Chrome, in Safari, in IE, Edge, and also Chrome on my iPhone as well. So as you can see, it records all this stuff and then relates it back to those requests. Here's the XHR table, which includes these bitwise status flags, the request ID, draft ID, which is the draft of the board. All right, so just to demonstrate how this XHR conversation works, I'm going to go in and edit one of my boards, and we're just going to watch how this conversation progresses over here. So there was a check-in. It was a get, obviously, since it was the first part of the conversation. All right, so I got these changes to my board. Kind of silly here, but I'm gonna let this thing kind of run its course while we go and take a look at what happened with our conversation. And oh, look at that! There's some new parts of the conversation. There's JSON included in the last 4 back and forths between the server and the client. So that's kind of what we'd expect since we were editing the board. So this is the tool I developed that kind of helped me refine the that conversation between the client and the server. So we've got this conversation going on right now between that one we just started, and oh, there's a lot of check-ins. But I can see here I've got a request ID of 2070, a draft ID of 60. I'm going to take and enter those into my little hacker form here. And since I have the authentication token for this on my computer, the server will think, you know, it's a valid request coming from that coming from this page, which I'm gonna start this thing going again here. Maybe we'll get to see an explosion in a little bit. But I'm gonna stick some JSON in here that is just kind of not standard, not what we'd expect from this. Of course, it would, because it's still valid JSON, it would wipe the the entire board on the server side at least. So I'm going to submit this, and oh hey, look at that! I got this response from the server saying, "Oh, we're connected. It was valid JSON," and oh, goodbye, because I said finalize. We're done. We're done editing. And sure enough, if we go look over here on the logs, yep, it was finalized. And then the next request to come in from this guy was like, uh-oh, there was a failure, and all of a sudden it stops working. But there's still some bugs I got to work out of the system, obviously. It's still a work in progress. But yeah, that's kind of the idea, at least on the back-end security server side of things. But as far as the front end goes, you know, you can have your own boards. Every user can do these, have multiple drafts of the same board. You know, like this one. If we go look at it, there's 44 different drafts of it, mostly from my experimentation with all of this. And I can look at all my drafts too, and I even have a little modal box going on here. So, and this is part of it. You know, as you can see, even on the client, it says, "Oh, did you lose an internet connection here? This board hasn't been accessed since it was created." So you know, stuff like that. All using this game. You don't have to be a logged in user to play. You do have to be one to edit. If I click edit, it just redirects me to the login form. But the play I can still do as a non-logged in user. So yeah, so that's kind of my wild experimentation with PHP and JavaScript.